Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Outsourcing Oasis. This week on our panel we have David Hemmett.
Hey, how are you?
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we're talking to... So I'm looking at your last name. I lived in Italy for 2 years, and I want to say Charles Palleschi.
You said it. Wow. Okay. Not many times people get the Italian pronunciation right, but you did it. Thank you.
But I've also met so many people that have an Italian last name that have anglicized it, and so you don't say it that way. So yeah, I was going to just go for it.
It increases the confusion, but I like saying it with the actual Palleschi. Yeah. CHI in Italian is ski. But that confuses people. So, but yeah, Charles Palleschi.
Well, and technically, actually, the SCHI is ski.
Yes, SCHI, yeah, that's it.
Because SCI is chi and SCI is she. So
anyway. There you go. A little learning lesson.
Well,
anyway, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, my name is Charles Palleschi, the founder of Spark Shipping. It's a SaaS. We work with e-commerce retailers, and we automate the connection with their different vendors.
That's pretty cool. Thanks. You know, I've been Charles. I've known both Charleses from around the same time. So that's maybe 3-4 years ago, something like that.
From the same comp.
From the same conference. That's right.
Yeah.
Anyways, I've always known, like, at a word level what you do. Like, I know you integrate, e-commerce with vendors, but it took me like a couple of years to actually figure it out, and a lot of digging through your website. You would just want to like expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, if you're not in e-commerce, you usually don't know this problem exists. If you're in e-commerce, you kind of feel this problem, but if you're not, you don't even know this is a problem. As a consumer, you've probably been on the other side of it, where you buy from, whatever.com, you go and buy a shirt, but it comes from, and you look at the company and they're in New York, but then it comes from Chicago. And you always wonder why. Or even more, you order a shirt and a pair of shoes, and one comes from Chicago and the other comes from Houston. What usually ends up happening is they're using, let's just say, Shopify, but they have different distributors in different locations. Mm-hmm. Shopify, just as an example, doesn't talk to those different distributors. Maybe one has an API, maybe one has a flat file. We're able to automate all those communications back and forth. So whether they have APIs, CSVs, EDI, probably not something you guys even are familiar with, but think like an API from the 1970s. That's still used more than you would think nowadays. And so we basically automate all those connections in between the retail side and what we call the vendor side. It's the organization actually fulfilling the order.
Resolve Digital helps build, optimize, and maintain e-commerce, SaaS, and other products built on Ruby on Rails. They can help build new applications from scratch, rescue projects in bad shape, provide ongoing development and maintenance for existing projects, augment your existing team with experienced Rails developers. They also specialize in Solidus and Spree commerce solutions. Go check them out at resolve.digital. Yeah, it's funny because you're like, you may have noticed. No, I don't. I order stuff and then I wait for it to show up.
But then every once in a while, it comes from a bot. You get 2 packages in the mail, completely different looking packages, different days, different tracking numbers. You kind of just don't think much of it.
No,
that's usually what's happening in the background.
You know what? Why I know where stuff comes from is because I pick up my packages in Florida. And in Florida, you pay a sales tax if it's, from a local warehouse. And so I immediately know if I'm being charged that tax that it's coming from Florida.
Yeah. And some folks have multiple warehouses, so we can even do things like split orders. So we know, hey, you're in Florida. Let's ship it out of the Florida warehouse so that you're not getting double taxed on that. So we do a lot of different unique things like that.
Oh, interesting.
How big is this product now? I mean, it sounds, if you're integrating a bunch of vendors, it might be pretty complex.
Yeah. So we've built probably somewhere between 100 and 150 pre-built integrations. So particular vendors, large ones, for example, like Ingram Micro, they're the largest electronics distributor in the world. So we have a pre-built integration with them, popping your credentials, and under the hood, it just works through the API. We also have some WYSIWYG tools where you can just build CSV integrations, email, XML files, just all different files. So people have built, I think, tens of thousands of different versions of different things you could do, combinations. And because all these suppliers use completely different formats. So, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like one of those spaces where somebody should focus on standardizing stuff, but it just probably won't happen because it's too far now.
Yeah, that's supposed to be what EDI was. That was the whole concept behind it. Think like a fixed width flat file, and this went back to we we can do some history here that went back 10, 20 years. And everyone said, yeah, we'll build these standards. And it was one of those standards that everyone applied differently. So it's like a non-standard standard, which is interesting. So then you can't just plug in with someone's EDI. You have to do all this testing. So that kind of didn't work out. Now everyone's moved to APIs, obviously synchronous, but then everyone implements their own. And we have ones that implement kind of built from, these modern REST APIs, and other ones that have built in these odd proprietary things that they kind of hired some local person to do, and it's a little janky. So we basically have to split orders over both these. And in order to come, and we could have to go to the, Strange API and other go to the REST API. They both send the data. We have to pull it back from both, push that back up to a Shopify, a BigCommerce, that sort of thing. So kind of a Zapier for something very specific.
So one of at Resolve Digital, which is one of the companies I run, we do a lot of e-commerce. That's our thing. And, we do it all mostly based around Spree and Solidus, and those are kind of the same. But one question I have, related to your product is, how different is the data that the different implementations manage, and how do you handle that? I imagine there's all sorts of crazy implementations around what attributes a product has or doesn't have for shipment.
That's tough. It's that's kind of the big piece. That's kind of way of getting that. That's a big part of the problem, and that's kind of why we exist, right? Simple example, right? Like let's say in Shopify you have street address 1 and 2. The vendor might have just street address 1. Another vendor has street address 1, 2, and 3. What do you do? Yeah. So you have to. There's a lot of this normalizing, denormalizing, in all sorts of quirky different ways. Certain people have different limitations on different fields. Just literally, we talk about street addresses for an hour on. Everyone implements them completely different every single time. So all these integrations have to be able to pass these different versions back and forth. And that's kind of where the magic happens.
It reminds me a little bit of, I had a contract where we were doing banking programming, right? And same thing, right? And it's not just addresses, it's account number formats and, whether or not they take, Swift or, just what we in the U.S. think of as regular debits or anything else. And then they all had different kinds of APIs. And some of them were like, you'd create this binary file because it was designed to work over a dial-up modem and you didn't want to send that much data over it. And so there are all these, it's not just that it's different, it's that there are legacy reasons for why it's different. And understanding that sometimes sheds light, and it's like, okay, if I think about it that way, it makes more sense. And it sounds like the same kind of hassle.
My background before this was in financial software, so that is what I did before this. So I know that you get those exact things.
You feel that pain.
And you look at it, you go, why would anyone ever do this? And you realize they built it in 1980 when data and connections were expensive, so they get this fixed width and this strange thing that went over this like direct peer-to-peer modem, odd setup.
They haven't updated their mainframe in 20 or 30
and they've spent tens of millions building it. Yeah, so they're not going to throw it away just because you came up with a better API. So they're going to no, you do what we want, not the other way around. So that's why we exist.
No, it makes sense. And I can totally imagine too. You have a vendor that, all right, I want mugs. I run Podcast Network, right? I want mugs with podcast artwork on it. And then it's like, and now I want t-shirts, but my mug company doesn't do t-shirts.
Exactly.
Right. And then, okay, well, we want beach towels now. Right. Yep. And neither of those companies do this. And so then what it turns out to is it's not this convenient REST or GraphQL API. It's whatever they've got because they've been around forever. And their main focus is manufacturing, not technology. So
what we do to add another wrinkle onto that exact situation is sometimes your mugs, maybe you actually have a small, mug printing press, if that's a thing. You make your mugs locally, but every time you run out of stock, you go back to your mug distributor. So then this happens all the time in things like automotive is a good example. A lot of those guys stock their, top 100, top 1,000 best parts locally. When that goes out of stock, you go back to a distributor network. Then there's anywhere between 1 and 10 different distributors that can fill this. So then we have to look down a distributor list, figure out what distributor has it, and then set it in their format each time. So it can even get more complicated that maybe you're sending it internally or make a decision to go external to like a dropship type network and kind of do this hybrid. Part of the order might get drop shipped, other gets filled internally. And like you said, your internal warehouse, that's fine. You built that. but you might have 10 different distributors with 10 different technologies underneath. So that's where we come in.
That sounds like fun. As I shake
So
my
that's
head.
one of those businesses where I think about it like health insurance. I always have ideas about how the health insurance and doctors and everybody can work better. And then I think about all the players and all the actors and the stakeholders and all the craziness that's behind the scenes and politicking. And this might not be the field I want to get into, even if there's like some significant improvements that can be made. And building a tiny little app for things like scheduling appointments is really complicated.
Yeah.
So Charles, you're from Boston. Were you born there?
Born and raised, just north of the city. But yeah, I've been around here.
We were talking a little bit earlier about how it was difficult to hire in Boston. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so definitely it's one of the tougher places to hire, and I've tried it a few times, and it's just you're competing against a lot of large companies here. It's a relatively high cost of living area, and then there's just if you're trying to hire tech talent, just the pool is of other companies you're competing with. There's we have the colleges, financial, biotechs. So some of them can offer, as a small company, things that you'll never be able to. My dental plan isn't going to keep up with MIT's dental plan anytime soon. We just can't. So kind of been able to do a lot of outsourcing in just different parts where maybe, it's just not as competitive as downtown Boston trying to hire someone. So that's definitely helped out.
Mm-hmm. And do you normally hire do you tend to hire within the U.S. in smaller cities? Do you look in the U.S. in larger cities? Do you look outside? What's your general approach?
I've tried to either U.S. or just something in the same time zone. So South America, Canada. Basically, I try to go vertical in my hiring. So at least because we need a lot of coverage kind of time-wise. I've tried to do kind of, once I go too far outside the time zone, it's very hard to kind of work together, at least from my point of view. I like kind of the more synchronous work. So it's always been something either Canada, US, South America, usually the smaller cities, but it's kind of been all over the place.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And are these generally...
An interesting thing to contrast there, though, that, I have one developer working for me, and I just check in with him periodically, and he's in Malaysia, right? So when we meet, we usually meet in the evening my time, which is in the morning his time, but it matters a whole lot less because I don't have several people to coordinate, and my technology stack, isn't that involved. But since you're a full-on technology company that focuses on that particular thing and you have several people working for you, that matters a lot more to you.
Yeah, I think the issue with it probably is we're doing production, like live orders are going through this, right? So if there's an issue, a lot of times it needs to be fixed right now. Like there's money orders, there's stuff on the line. So let's say you mentioned like a scheduling tool. If that goes down for 5-6 hours, it's bad, but someone's business usually isn't, maybe you're not getting appointments scheduled, but if you're e-commerce, if your entire order flow is down, you're pretty much just sitting there waiting for us to fix it. So saying, I have a developer in Malaysia and you have to wait, 12 hours for this guy to wait, he's in bed. Yep. That's just kind of a tough sell versus at least having everyone in one time zone. You kind of know you have you have your kind of business hours where this is when we're around, and it just makes it a lot easier.
Yep.
Eventually, if we expanded the team, it would be nice to actually have round-the-clock coverage. But if we're going to focus on the time, it's kind of U.S. working hours.
And most of your clients are North America, right?
Most, but a surprising number. We do pretty well in Australia, oddly. Haven't figured that one out. So somehow US, Canada, Australia, probably some of the big points. We do some in Europe as well. But yeah, most, I'd say 80% North America.
Mm-hmm. And then you have, I guess you need to take live customer support sometimes. So
there's definitely calls, email. We actually do like personalized onboarding sessions with everyone. So somebody does a screen share with them, kind of walks them through the setup. There is some setup involved, and kind of the price to product makes it so we can actually walk people through it instead of saying, hey, here's a free trial. Good luck. Kind of pat them on the back and let them go. We say, let's take payment up front and then actually help you through the product instead of just, let you kind of wander around and maybe get this work and maybe don't.
Yeah. That's pretty interesting. I was recently trying to figure out how to set up online payments for e-commerce shops in Dominican Republic, which is where I live. And it's tough because there's a couple of local companies here that will do it, but they're very bureaucratic. So there's a funny system here where the thing is, you don't have Stripe here, right? And so they're not competing with Stripe, and so they don't need to care about being fast or being efficient or anything like that. I could go on Stripe and open an account now and be selling in an hour, right? But I can't do that here. And so here, it's more of a look, let's negotiate. We'll sign a long agreement, and then we're going to give you access to our API, and you can look at it. And this is a process that might take a month or 2 or 3. And so I was just wondering with the whole COVID thing, well, how do we do this faster? And I was researching options in the US, and there's one called 2Checkout, which apparently serves a bunch of countries, Dominican Republic included. And then weirdly enough, which is the other one? CyberSource has an agreement with a local company. And so you hire the local company, but you're actually getting the CyberSource backend. So that's pretty cool. But the thing was, I signed up for this actually, I went to the 2Checkout website and I wrote them in, and I went to the contact us area and I said, hey, I want to buy from you. I have a whole bunch of clients that want to sign up for this. Never heard back from them. So what I did was I created an account, went inside, played with it, and decided that I wrote to them and asked them questions, because then once you sign up, then you get the email from their customer service rep. But they weren't really, all that much into getting things running. And so, I don't know. Maybe it could have been a good business opportunity, but then eventually the local company called me and they've started working with us. And so they kind of lost out on that sale. And I was willing to buy from them because they were going to be faster, but they just didn't have the support to get me onboarded. But yeah, I guess it depends a lot on the transaction volume and the revenue that you're bringing in for them, right?
Yeah, and it's probably high with the payment process because you don't really know at the beginning, right? They're taking percentages,
right?
Of transaction volume, right? So unless you're signing up and saying we're going to pay you X dollars per month, it doesn't really. It's hard for them to know that. So yeah. I remember having that experience with Authorize.net back in the day where. This is, many, many years ago, you sign up and they mail you a camera, like a disposable camera, and say, you need to take a picture of your office. And at the time I was in college and I'm like, what do I take a picture of? What do I even do with this thing? So I took a picture of a door of just an office in a building and sent it to them. And they're like, yep, good. You have an office. And that was the check. That was what we're doing. And just, yeah. They mailed you a camera. I just went into a random office, took a picture. There's a door. That's mine.
That's hilarious. So let's touch a little bit on hiring. I wanted to hear. So just for disclosure, Charles and I have worked together before. We helped him hire a developer, and we're currently in the process of helping him hire another. But I'd like to hear from your perspective, Charles. What goes on when you need to hire a developer, and why would you hire a company like Blue Coding to help you with that? What's going on behind the scenes?
The biggest thing is, so when you start going to the outsourcing world, the pool, for the positive and negative, becomes very large very quickly, right? You can hire anyone. That's a benefit, but it's also, the problem is you can hire anyone, right? Where then all of a sudden you can get thousands, and just filtering through them for a small company just becomes this very overwhelming process where, unless the signal to noise ratio is just really bad, where you get a lot of resumes, some of these folks have been developing for about an hour. Others, are just priced completely wrong. It's just, there's a lot to sort through. So yeah, we've worked together because it's just having someone at least to do the first several passes to say, okay, we've got all the resumes. Okay, now we filter. Now here's the ones y'all looking for. Here are the ones that are tested, and kind of doing those first iterations cuts way down on my time of having to actually go through each one of those, and then kind of just looking at, 1, 2, 3 folks and saying, okay, these are all people that check all the boxes. And now it's just picking between who out of these folks that already check the boxes do we want to work with? So that's been kind of one of the biggest things on just the time it would take me to kind of do that sorting process. And it's not what we do, right? Just hiring at scale is just not something we do internally. And the goal isn't to be a 500-person organization where we're going to build up an HR staff and have all these things internally. So it doesn't really fit the business to get really good at hiring lots of people very quickly.
Yeah, that's interesting. That was one of the things that I was last show we did. I was talking with Charles about with Chuck about I think Chuck, was it small businesses and what we learned about their hiring processes? That was kind of the subject. And one of the things came up. We kind of divided really small software companies or small software companies into two categories. And so there were those with the technical capacity to run their hiring processes, and then there were those that were owned and operated by non-technical founders, and so they couldn't really do that. And one of our ideas on why the companies, even with a team or a technical founder who can do the vetting themselves, don't want to get into it was because, they've got a business to run. And so,
yeah.
And part of the reason they're normally hiring is because they have more things to do than they can, right? So that's why you're hiring a developer in the first place. I thought that was that was pretty interesting. And then I'd like to hear a little bit more about maybe what you take into account. So I know your product is technically complex, and so there's an important technical factor there. What else is important for you when hiring someone for your team?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, so strong technical skills, like you said, it's kind of required. You're dealing with important data. It just can't, just certain things just cannot happen. So you need someone that's, I don't know the right word for it, like a mature developer. I don't know how you describe it. Somebody that's used to working with production, like critical data. And I've never got the right term for this, but somebody that can understand that you just can't like lose a record. You can't be wrong. So just that level of working, and somewhat that experience, it's more difficult to find than you would think sometimes. A lot of folks are used to working with, this CRUD app where, things are relatively simplistic. We have a cluster of servers here. These probably about 100 or so like worker processes that are kind of just running nonstop to kind of churn through all this data. So you can't be very wrong very often. You need to be right. So just downtime is a big deal. So somebody that's used to that first. So it's not just being good technically, it's being good in that way. And that's kind of a different skill in itself.
Yeah, I think that comes maybe from depending what you need to look for is people with certain backgrounds, right? Yeah, that's something you develop that I guess that care and that attention to detail where this is not something I can try out and be wrong about it. But I think it generally comes from people with certain backgrounds. It's going to depend on which companies you worked for before and how they treated development,
Yeah, it just kind of if you're used to working with larger data sets, right? Just if you just literally do a select off an unindexed column, guessing you have a technical audience there, but just something that simple, you could literally bring down a word process because of that, or tie it up for an hour. Because some of these tables are monstrous. So you just can't do these certain things. So just someone who's used to working with just large data sets, complex data sets, that's pretty big deal. And it's not as easy to find I think a lot of folks kind of present themselves like that, but then you have to kind of really dig into it and say, okay, tell me more about the background. What have you really done at kind of large data sets? Like how do indexes work? Just things like that to see if they've, for instance, worked in finance where all data is large and important. It's just the nature of it. Versus, let's say I've interviewed folks that have worked for agencies where is building like new startup type websites where every site's just a new site right out of the gate. You don't really run into scaling challenges. Versus we can run into that. You can just deploy code and hit it right now. So it's just a different way of working.
Yeah.
Early in my career, I figured out which jobs were worth working at and which ones weren't, mostly by trial and error. I created a system that I used to find jobs and later contracts as a freelancer. If you're looking for a job or trying to figure out where you should go next, then check out my book, The Max Coder's Guide to Finding Your Dream Developer Job. The book walks you through figuring out what you want, vetting companies that meet your criteria, meeting that company's employees, and getting them to recommend you for a job. Don't settle for whoever has listed their job on the job board. Go out and proactively find the job you'll love. Buy the book at devchat.tv/jobbook. That's devchat.tv/jobbook.
Yeah, I definitely understand the difference. I think for us in e-commerce, it's the same approach. And so this is something that I have trouble with when hiring developers too, is there's lots of folks that are good out there, but maybe they've taken the experimental mindset a little bit too far.
Yeah.
So, and so basically, what it comes down to is, look, changes cost money here, a lot of money, and our clients won't be happy if we cost them money. And so we need people who are super careful with certain things. And maybe in the e-commerce projects that we handle, it's not so much about the size of the data sets. It's more of everything, any downtime costs money. Customer data, we need to be very, very careful with.
Yep.
So there's just little things like that you need to be aware of if you don't want to run astray.
Well, and we publish an API. There's been third-party apps written on our platform now. So now just maintaining that it's not just the platform, it's other folks that are now dependent on this platform. So now you have to make sure everything's backwards compatible. If there's a breaking change, how do you deal with that? So there's all these kind of questions that aren't just, writing Ruby on Rails code. Just how do you roll out a change that doesn't break the current users, but adds features for a new user? And things like that take someone just a different level of developer maturity, if that's the right term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's funny because you're saying a mature developer. That's exactly the word that we came up with for the same thing. Somebody who's done complex work in production environments, essentially.
Yeah, there was a good talk, and I wish I had at Business Soft one year where they were talking about that, and whoever it was had a really great term for that. And maybe I could try to find it for the show notes, but it was kind of described like that too, that developer maturity, if that's the best term. So that's one of the tough parts. We do a little interfacing with clients or vendors, depending on which way you want to look at it, where we're building these integrations. We have internal projects, use Basecamp for all that, but it's nice when the developer can talk directly to someone on their end. A lot of times, obviously, you hit roadblocks, and just having someone that can talk directly to them is also a pretty important skill. Otherwise, it has to be me or support or someone else has to kind of get in and kind of do the go-between. But just obviously the game of telephone, you lose a little something in translation each time.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I've been thinking is important, is building domain knowledge, right? So it's not only about whether you're a good developer and the technical tools and have the technical skill set. It's also about how well do you know the product and the customers and their common needs and their common issues and what's important to them. Because all of that whole chain is what provides value, understanding it and being able to make decisions around what's done or not based on ultimately on what makes the customer happy and what helps the business achieve its goals and what drivers are.
Yeah, that's tough. It's tough to find, right? Someone with e-commerce experience, and because if not, you have to. I used to be an e-commerce retailer before this, so I kind of just a lot of times go by my own experience or just kind of what I've picked up through the sales process or support process. So I've kind of absorbed a lot. But if the developer doesn't have that, then essentially for every question they have to come back to you of basically saying, what's the best way of handling this? Versus, yes, as someone built up that domain knowledge, they can kind of run with a lot more on their own and just, not have to, they can make good choices on their own, which is fantastic.
Yeah, well, and it's not just how do I do this or how do I do that, but even knowing the proper level of concern for this thing versus the other thing. One of my earlier development jobs, I got hired and then pretty much immediately promoted to team lead, and we were doing lead gen for education. And I mean, I'd get in and we'd start dealing with stuff, and there was terminology I had to learn. I mean, just the jargon in the industry. How do we think about this? What do we need to know about the leads coming in, about the educational groups that we're sending stuff to? I mean, the whole 9 yards. And so, yeah, it's not just what's the best way of doing this, but actually knowing what's important and what the process or pipeline is for it. And I mean, all of these different things that you gain context out of experience. There's really not another way to do it.
I know. And the problem is once you're in it for a while, you take a lot of things for granted that are just, to you, they're obvious, and to everyone internally, they're obvious. But then every time you bring someone on, you realize how not obvious many of these things are. So that's definitely an issue. And I've tried to be better at, everyone tells you document processes, kind of explain all these things. But each time you do it, you still realize how many holes there are. And just some basic questions. And it's not the developer's fault. because it's just, unless you have that domain knowledge, you wouldn't know. And then even in our product, we use certain terminology that's different than what Shopify uses, which is different than what BigCommerce uses, which is different than Magento, right? So they all use different terminology to make it even more confusing. So even if they have Shopify experience, they might not know what's analogous in BigCommerce, for instance.
Well, and the other thing is that those terms aren't just how I converse with my boss or my teammates about it, but it shows up in the code in how I name variables, how I name classes, how I name functions, how I name everything else. And so it's going to permeate everything.
Yeah.
And so you have to be conversant in the lingo.
Yes.
Well, that brings two questions for me, and these are questions that I've faced, right? So one of them is, do I hire with a skill set and the knowledge, or do I build it? And then, what does that mean in terms of employee retention, right? And what I'm thinking of is, oftentimes, I've come across this. I'm like, I have to hire for this role. I don't know anybody who has that experience. I don't know how to find them. Let me just hire somebody to train them. And that has so far not been a good idea. I don't recommend it. It takes a long, long time. And then what you have is you have several years of, or at least several months and probably several years of somebody who can't just do the job alone quite yet. But you still need to focus on keeping them advancing and progressing and happy, because otherwise you've lost out on all this effort. But then your other option is, well, maybe I just hire somebody who knows all of this stuff. And one question I've thought of is there anybody out there that even has this type of experience? That might be a question that comes up in your space, Charles, with your product that's pretty specific. But at least, when we're thinking about it, hiring developers in Latin America, we're thinking about recruiting. Like, there's probably a couple of people out there who've done it, but I don't know if there's people out there who have the right experience and share the right, the core values that we want on our team and all of that. And if there are, can we actually hire them? Is it affordable for us? Can we convince them that we're a good option? How have you approached that kind of question? Do you generally go with hire and train? Do you generally just, I guess it depends on the position, but what's your thought?
Yeah. If you can find the person there's there's two sides, right? Do they have the business knowledge and the developer knowledge, right? Like, and they're completely independent. If you could find someone with both, they're a unicorn. You should go, capture them and never let them go, because it's a fantastic. But they're very, you'll almost never find that person that's you can afford, looking for work, rock solid developer, complete industry knowledge. If you can, grab that person. Most likely you can't find that person, so you're gonna have to kind of pick. Do you want someone that's a little more industry knowledge, or worse developer? Or I guess you could pick worse of both, but don't do that. So that's a bad one. And I would say if you want to pick between the two, I've tried to go for better developers and then teach them the industry side. I've tried going the other way as well, and that seems like a tougher, just a tough road, right? Being a good developer, a lot of times, I don't know about you guys, but usually start off when you're, a kid, basically. You're building 10, 20, 30 years of knowledge and saying, I'll train someone. As a small business owner, you don't have time to come in each day and say, all right, we're going to run a 6-hour class on naming variables and just how do you do this? From the ground up, just teaching someone all this stuff is very, very time consuming. And I've tried it, and it just, you almost can't afford to hire a entry-level developer. So I'd say if you want to pick between one or two, go with someone that's a better developer and doesn't have the domain knowledge, because that seems to be a little easier to teach.
Yeah. I've faced this situation in other roles, and because developers, since we're always hiring developers as an organization, that's the one I don't have a problem with. And we have people who can just do it constantly, and so we can generally just file through people until we find somebody we want. But for other roles, take sales. I'm not particularly a good salesperson. I know what we need to do in our organization, but I'd much rather hire somebody that can come in and teach me rather than the other way around. And it's not so much because there aren't people out there with potential. There's certainly people that I could hire that have the right potential, the right attitude, and they want to learn, but I can't sit with them every day and walk them through every step of the process until, down the road they're good at their job. And so what it comes down to is, I need to make this is a money choice, right? And the choice: can I afford to hire somebody more expensive that brings the right skill set, or can I afford to the opportunity cost of me sitting down and training this person?
Yes. Yeah, and it's a choice, not just money, but also just time. You might just not have the hours in the day to do that. I've done that before, and you start feeling like a college professor on coming in and, all right, we'll get a whiteboard and we'll start, mapping stuff out. And then you just realize you just sunk 4 or 5 hours into teaching, and you're going to have to do this every day for a long time. And I've worked with larger organizations where they have training, like a whole training department, a whole training protocol, and you go in and they kind of train you up, and there's someone, you have a mentor and you have all this stuff. But in a small company, that mentor is usually either the CTO or the CEO, basically. So, do you really have time at that point to actually sit down every day? And you're not training a whole cohort of people, you're training one. So each time someone new comes in, you're basically just training nonstop.
So that was recently I saw a tweet from Patrick McKenzie, and he said a lot of people don't realize it, but the smallest productive unit at a large company is generally an engineering team of about 8 people, because that's the number of people you need to maintain a small product, have give vacations, train up new employees, and all of that stuff. And I was thinking about it's right, that's true. And when you have a small team, you have 3, 4 developers, 2 developers, 1 developer. It's just like you can't do all of those things together, and so you have to pick, right? And maybe the training is the part that you don't want to do because you don't have the time for it. So you pick people that don't need it. That's also why you accrue technical debt.
Yeah.
So I guess the part of this that I'm wondering about is, so let's say, Charles and David, that you get to the point where you find somebody that you're pretty comfortable with, you're willing to do the work to fill in their gaps. What are the steps to bring them on board, and then how do you actually plan out this process of doing that training? Because I don't want to just have to show up and then meander through whatever I've got to wish they knew, for 5 hours a day. I'd rather have a plan for, okay, this is the stuff that you probably need to know. Your team members can help you figure out these other pieces of what you need to know. So how do you start actually making the plan to get these folks on board so they can start contributing?
So we have, it's relatively unique, so might not actually help them in listening, but kind of at least my process is kind of in 2 parts of it. We have the main engine, right, that does all the processing. Relatively large, would not expect a new developer to be able to even touch that for a while. But then we have those modules I was talking about earlier. It's somewhere between, I think, 100 or 150 of them. And they all kind of run in their own space. And a lot of them look similar to other ones. So you're almost, when you're building a new one, you're almost taking recipes from, I need an FTP recipe, I need this REST parsing thing over here. And we kind of have this library built up of different recipes for each. So that's usually, I'd say, the first place where someone new is getting trained, just because, A, they can't break anything usually if you're building a new one because no one's using it. And then you can just look at that code outside of everything. They're all tested out. They all kind of run outside of the main engine. So that's usually a good place to start. And they just look very similar to each other. We even have a generator that kind of just builds a structure for one. So it's a very good place to start and just have someone do the kind of first thing that plugs into the main beast. And they don't need to know the whole database structure, just kind of where that module is interfacing with the main database. And there's just very few points in between. So it's kind of a nice place to dip someone's toe in the water. And we have to do them all the time. That's the other thing. So there's just a constant like assembly line basically of these. So we're doing, I don't know, probably about 4 or 5 of them now. And they're just constantly kind of coming through. So we always have more. They always look similar. There's a process there. So I kind of find that's usually the best place to start someone and just kind of let them get used to even just the build process, how we push PRs, just that all those little processes you kind of just take for granted. That at least gives them time to do that and not have to wrap their head around the whole database structure, for example, from day one.
Yeah, I've been learning about this over time. How do you get people up to speed? And I think as a small company, it's difficult, right? You go to a large company, and my wife works for an airline, and like they have a whole process for onboarding people. Go to the have like a school. And so, first week you get sent to the school, you spend a couple weeks there, train up on all the processes. Then they have like a whole sequence of different jobs that they'll put you through. So you learn every part of the operation, and then they'll have continuous training, and they have like an online platform for that. It's all structured, but I'm sure that requires a whole team behind setting up this training process and this onboarding process. And so as a small company, you obviously don't have that, those nice things. And what it's come down to for me is it's a question of what will bring you value, right? And so we hear a lot of people talking about Docker, and one of our developers at Resolve Digital recently said, "Hey, David, why do we need Docker? Most of our projects take like 5 minutes to set up anyways. They're on a Rails. We know how to do it. And honestly, our team doesn't change quickly enough so that we need to be doing this frequently." And that's one question. So how long does it take to put things on Docker or something like that? And what am I losing there, right? What type of flexibility am I losing? And how often does this actually happen so that it matters? And so if we're thinking about hiring, how often do we hire new developers? If it's once a year, that might look really different than if we're hiring 3 developers a quarter, right? And that said, I think that there are things that we can start putting into place every time we hire somebody new that will just help the next time become easier, right? And so taking notes, one thing we've learned is, we need to hire people with certain skill sets that have certain shared values with our company and kind of fit into a mold. That will save us a lot of turnover, because we've learned that certain people just don't fit into our model properly, and then they're not happy, we're not happy, and they rotate. So we learned that, and we'll write it down. So next time we hire, let's remember to find somebody who's okay with working more independently, who sets their own goals, does these certain things, because we don't have that what they need in our organization otherwise. And then, for example, starting out, what we'll do is, all right, so let's set up this project. What does that take? And just write it down, as we do it. And so, Charles, I was showing you last week some documentation that we had set up around development. And basically what that is somebody went through and did it and just took notes and said, hey, the first time we do this, setting up this project, install X, install Y. When this happens, do Z. And go through that, and then you have it documented. And sure, you didn't use it that time, but if somebody comes along the next time, then you at least already have part of that process set up. And you won't go through that for everything, because there are certain parts of the process that are kind of obvious at the time for the person that you're hiring. And so, if there's training on a certain part of Rails and that person already knows it, then you might not go through that. But anything that you come across during that onboarding and training process that you can take notes of in a reasonable way, that's not going to take you too much time, that it's worth it, because then the next time you just have it set up already. And so I think it's something like progressive, where each time we document some stuff, we figure out some shortcomings we had and just take them into account for the next time, and our process becomes better over time.
Yeah, I was looking over your process. I was impressed. Definitely impressive how well structured it is. I've even found we're a remote company, and just the more we can do just asynchronously, try to do everything in Basecamp over text, at least then there's some sort of audit record of it, that even if we don't document it right then and there, we can go back and refer to it, pull it out, then put it in a document. Versus when we're doing this stuff over a phone, a screen share, it's said once and then it's just lost. Or even the whole decision is, you look back and say, why did we do that? And then you don't even have any context of what, if it's not obvious in the code or kind of business decisions, it's not even obvious on why. And sometimes it'll be why I made the decision. So I sometimes need that audit record to know, why did I make the decision 2 years ago? And why did we do it like this? And usually know there's a good reason, but unless you really have that written down somewhere, and like I said, just doing everything in kind of a message or a task in Basecamp, at least provides some sort of written record of why it was done. And then when you do build your documents, it's nice being able to just extract it all out of there.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. One other thing I just want to add to that is, don't be afraid to start ugly.
Yeah.
You're going to write it. You're going to know it's not complete. You're going to know it's not even well written, right? Just start ugly and then make it better, because the ugly is still better than nothing.
Yes, I've tried to get better at. I was writing document the other day on machine setup, like a developer machine setup. I'm like, all right, to actually like write this correctly, it would take hours. But let's just start the document, bullet 1, install VS Code. All right, at least we have the document, like save that, done, let's move on. And then every time you think of something, now it's easy just to pop that open and add your second bullet point. But if just creating that initial document at least gives you a place to capture that.
Yeah, or the next time somebody walks through it, they're like, wait, where do I do this? Or where do I put this? And it's like, oh, yeah, okay, open up the command line and then do that, right? So then you add that step.
Yeah. So just creating, like you said, just creating like the most basic version on the first pass is better than way better than just waiting and trying to wait for some perfect document with some like diagram in it and make it look nice. Just get a couple bullet points in there.
Yep.
Well, I think we might be running out of time by now.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're pretty close to time here.
Charles, do you have any picks that you'd like to share?
Oh, let's see. Are you looking for book picks or what kind of picks?
Could be a book pick, anything you want. Movie, book, some software we should know about, tools.
That one thing that's getting you through the quarantine?
No, I mean, right now I've been doing a lot of Blue Apron. That's been getting that delivered during the quarantine.
There you go.
Yeah, this is a pick. No, a lot of reading on the Kindle right now. I think I've actually been going back and reading some old books. I think I picked up Stephen Covey the other day, and I've read that book, 10 times. But just I've realized that's one of those books. Every time you read it, what is it? 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Is that?
Yep.
Yeah. And like every time you read, if you read it just like once every year or two, you still get something different every time. So that's one of the good ones.
So that's interesting. I think my dad has like 4 or 5 different 7 Habits of Highly Effective.
Yep.
Something. I read a couple of them, but I haven't gone through all of them, honestly. So
it's worth a read. And you recommended it to me recently, The 1 Minute Manager. I thought that was a great book. So thank you for that.
Oh, yeah. Cool. Great. I'm glad you liked it. Very nice. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yeah, it's great chatting with you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.